Creations with Christina. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're going to be doing a die cutting 101 and some tips and tricks for die cutting. First, I thought I would talk about the different types of things that you can run through your machine. So there's dies. These are thinlit dies and they have a blade on them so that you can cut out cardstock, material, felt, different types of materials like that. And there are lots of different types of dies. So this particular set has floral images. Then we have things that are great for layering for when you're making your cards or doing your scrapbook pages. And there's also these really intricate dies that have tons of little shapes, and I'm going to have some tips for you for cutting those out. We also have embossing folders. There are many different types of embossing folders. There's regular embossing folders, 3D embossing folders, really large embossing folders, but these are great for adding detail to your cards. This is a standard embossing folder, so it's just a regular thin embossing folder, and what you do is you put a piece of cardstock inside and run that through your machine. This is called a 3D embossing folder, which means it gives way more detail than your regular embossing folder and has more of a raised image, but it's also much thicker than a regular embossing folder. So you can see the difference in size on both of these. They also come in different sizes, so we have ones that are much larger, which are great for doing slimline cards or 5x7 cards, and many more sizes. Each machine will come with its own set of plates. So one particular machine I have, which is my manual machine over here, and we'll talk about the difference between manual and electronic in a bit, have different platforms. These are the plates that you use to run through your machine. When you're setting up your machine and deciding what you're going to be die cutting, so if you're going to do a regular die, you're going to want to have a different setup. So when you're running a regular die, so if we have one of these dies out, we would actually set our plates up according to the machine. So this particular machine has a platform, 2 acrylic plates, and you can see these are got marks in them from being run through the machine. And then we also have an embossing plate and an embossing mat. This is the embossing plate and the embossing mat. This is used for when you run your die cut through your machine. You would use these 2 things to run it through one more time, and it'll actually add an additional dimension to your die cut. One particular machine I have does not include a plate. It doesn't require a plate. However, you are limited to what you can run through the machine. So I can't run 3D folders through embossing folders through my machine because it just doesn't seem to have enough pressure, which is why I have additional machines. This is for a Gemini Junior, so this is the largest plate that comes with it. There are other machines that have larger plates. So this particular set of plates goes with my Spellbinders machine, and I can actually buy smaller plates and use that inside of my larger machine, which is nice because then I can run multiple dies at one time, or I can use a smaller plate and just do my single dies. This is an example of larger dies. So this particular setup is for my Sizzix machine, and it comes with 2 different platforms. We have a cutting platform, and then we have an embossing platform along with 2 acrylic plates. You can also purchase magnetic platforms, which means that when you put your dies down, it's going to actually stick right to the plate. You do have to make sure you use your platform and then an acrylic plate, then your dies, because every time you die cut, you want to be die cutting onto an acrylic plate and not right on the platform. This will stick to that. Now my plates are warped from running them through the machine, so one tip is to, when you're running them through your machine, to flip them quite often so that you're changing up how they're running through the machine. That'll help prevent your plates from warping as much if you keep flipping them around. Some dies have a lot of intricate cuts in it, so this particular die has tons of different little shapes they're going to cut out. You might sometimes need a shim. This is a metal shim, and you can use this to help add some pressure to your die so it'll get all of that little detail. There are 2 different types of machines. There's an electronic machine and a manual machine. Electronic machine means you plug it in and it has power, and a manual machine usually has a crank on the side, so you have to turn this to run your plates through your machine. Let's do a close-up look at each of the different machines. If you're just starting out with die cutting, you might want to think about getting a manual die cutting machine. That's the one that has the handle on the side so you can run your plates through your machine. It is less expensive than electronic. Electronic one is much more expensive. Some of the machines have doors that open and will give you a place for you to run your platform through your machine. Some of them actually come with already set up with this layout and they don't fold up. This is a nice storage saving feature if they flip up. And there's a couple different machines that have the flip up, and I know there's one that has a permanent base, so this part doesn't flip up. So a manual die cutting machine means that you're going to put your plates into your machine and you're going to use the handle on the side to run them through. And you can go frontward and you can go backward. This is an electronic die cutting machine, which means it has power and it is plugged in. Some machines have doors that open and close. This particular machine also has a little storage area where I keep an extra little pokey tool and a piece of a thing of washi tape, which I'll talk about in a second as part of my tips and tricks. It also has a reverse button. This machine has larger size plates so that you could do multiple at one time. However, you can buy single plates. So this is the smaller size plate, and I can run this through my machine this way. This goes with the regular manual die cutting machine, and I can run it through this way. This particular machine has a sensor, so as soon as my plates are in the right area, it's going to start pulling the plate through along with our setup of our die cutting. So I'm going to put my 2 acrylic plates on here because they do need to be on there. And once I put it in, you'll see here that it grabs it and it pulls it right through the machine. I can let this run completely through the machine. So as soon as it starts to go, I can also hit the reverse button if I wanted to come back out to the front. If I needed to double die cut something, I have that option. A lot of the time, our platforms are going to tell us how to set up our system for die cutting. That is called a sandwich. It's not a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but it's a way for us to know how to run our different die cuts through our machine. So this particular machine is telling me for thinlets, framelets, and so on. So we're going to go through just how to die cut just a regular plain die. I thought I would use this for my tutorials because this is mostly the size that you're going to be using if you have a regular die cutting machine. If you have one of the larger machines, then you'll use the larger plates, but it all pretty much works the same way. Remember, each machine has a different system for setting up how to run your dies through your machine. So this particular system does show right here on the platform what you need to do. So this is the magnetic platform, which is this right here. And then you're going to need, if you're going to die cut, you're going to need 2 of your acrylic plates. So I have my 2 acrylic plates. I keep one that is the one that has most damage to it. You can see all the different little die cuts cut into that plate. This is on both sides. So what you're going to do is the more often you use this, if you don't flip them over, you're going to end up with warping. So I don't know if you could see that my plate is slightly warped. It's not too bad, but what I do is as I'm die cutting, I will flip them over. I do use 1 plate for die cutting, and then I keep 1 plate that is the one that usually doesn't get die cut. This particular one did get a die cut on it, but I use this as my top plate. This is the one that never really sees too much die cutting action, and I use this for the top. What I do is when it's time to replace, I only have to replace 1 of these, and then I'll bring in one of the new ones and transfer this one over to my die cutting one. It's just a little tip for saving some of your plates and not going through and using all of it all the time. I've been doing that for years and it's worked great. I thought I would just take you through how to do a basic die cut. So I do have a die right here. This is just a little floral piece. Happens to be one that has many different floral pieces so we can build a flower out of it. But I'm just going to show you how to set this up. I have my magnetic platform, my acrylic plate, a piece of cardstock, and then I'm going to take the die that has the sharper edge. So there's a side that's flat, and then there's a side that has an edge on it. I'm going to take that edge face down and put that towards my magnetic plate. And you can see that it does kind of grab onto my plate. Although sometimes there are areas where it might resist. I'm not fine. Oh, there you go. So you can see where it just kind of spun. It's because it's resisting that area. And I'll show you a tip for that in a second. But just to go through a basic die cutting, this is the magnetic platform, the acrylic plate, my cardstock, my die facing down, and then another acrylic plate. I'm going to go ahead and run this through my machine, and then we're going to end up with, I got a lot of static. And then we have our die cut piece, there's our plate, and there is our little flower that we cut out. To do an embossing folder, we're going to use the platform. We're going to take our embossing folder, and we're going to stick our cardstock into the embossing folder. Just close that up, set that right on top of our platform, and bring in our acrylic plate. And there we have a beautifully embossed piece of cardstock, which makes for great backgrounds. If you're using a magnetic plate, or if you've stamped an image and it has a die that coordinates with that image so that it'll cut around that image, sometimes it's helpful to use some tape. I'm going to take my little flower here, and I showed you before that sometimes my magnetic plate will resist where it wants to go. So what I do is I use some type of low-tack tape. I have this purple tape that I use. I have mint tape from scrapbook.com, and then right inside of my little drawer here, I also have washi tape. Washi tape is a great option and very inexpensive, but I like to use a combination. Either sometimes I'm using the blue tape or the purple tape. I'm just going to take a piece and rip it off and use that to hold my die in place while I run it through my machine. This is great, like I said, for stamping. So if you have a stamped image that has a coordinating die that cuts around that stamped image, you definitely want to make sure you're holding that in place. You don't want to rely on your magnetic platform. You want to make sure that it's being held in place, and that's where using a low-tack tape comes in handy. So I'm going to run this through my machine one more time. So now you'll see when I pull this out, it's going to hold everything into place, but it will leave my die cut right where I wanted it to be. You just have to be careful depending on how much pressure is on your machine when you're pulling off your cardstock. So if you wanted to use this part of your cardstock, you just want to make sure that you're not pulling and tearing your cardstock. I like to save my tape. Sometimes I'll just stick it right to my machine so I can use it again. These intricate dies that have all these great cutouts are absolutely beautiful, but sometimes they could be a little bit tricky to die cut. I'm going to take my platform, my acrylic plate, my cardstock, my die facing down, so it's going to cut into my cardstock, and another acrylic plate. But I want to show you one thing that I have an issue with, and it's not an issue, it is something that's common through other machines. I'm going to turn this around, so I'm die cutting my intricate design just like so. So I'm running it through horizontally. I'm going to show you what happens when I do this. When I do this, I don't get a complete cutout of my image. So you can see there's a big area right here that did not cut through at all. I did cut through on the sides, but I didn't cut through here. A tip in one of my previous videos was to cut at an angle. So if I put my cardstock in and put my die down and give it a little turn so it's not completely straight, but cut at an angle, you're going to get a better cut. So let's run this through the machine now with my die cut at an angle. Now you have to be careful. If you have cardstock hanging out and you have a smaller machine, this will get crunched into the side of the machine and might move things around. You definitely want to make sure your cardstock is within your plates. I'm using my larger plates so I don't have to worry about that little piece sticking out. And now we should have a nicely cut die. So you can see all those pieces are going to be left behind and all of the pieces cut out. So you can see that it all went through. So another tip is now we have all these little tiny pieces everywhere, and I get them all over my craft room. I'm going to take this little foam mat here, and then I have one of these all-in-one tools. This tool has a little pokey thing on the end, which I just stabbed myself with, and then it's got a little foam brushy roller thing on the other end. And this is great for running over your die cuts and loosening up those dies and getting them all out from your piece. You can also use the little pokey tool here to pop out some of those pieces as well. And it's also great when you have them stuck into your plate to poke them out. So most dies have these little areas where you can poke out those little pieces that are getting stuck into your die. And then if you don't like this little mess that gets left behind, which I usually end up with it all over my floor, I'm going to show you one more tip. Another way to collect all those little tiny pieces is to use a dryer sheet. I just cut off a piece of a dryer sheet, and I'm going to take my cardstock, my plate, this is my intricate die, and I'm going to turn this to the side a little bit so I have pressure, even pressure going through my machine. And then we're going to add our other acrylic plate, and I'm going to run this through the machine. I'm going to remove my acrylic plate. I'm going to remove my die. So you can see most of the die pieces stayed right within my cardstock. And now I'm gonna go ahead and peel my cardstock. And this is what I love about it. All of those little tiny pieces are stuck within the dryer sheet. Now we do have a couple that stayed in here, and you could just use your pokey tool to pop those out, but it is such a cleaner way to clean up and get all those little die cut pieces. And plus, if you use a scented dryer sheet, it makes your card smell really good. So now all I have to do is just kind of pull this up and throw this in the garbage and not have this little mess that I did actually now spill all over my desk. Something we didn't talk about and I didn't have to use is a metal shim. The metal shims are great for those intricate dies. So if you have a die that no matter which way you're putting it into your machine, it's not cutting through all the way, try a metal shim. This is one from a different machine, but it works great and I've been using it in this one. But now that I found out this technique of turning it to the side, I'm getting a perfect cut every single time. That is our 101 on die cutting machines along with tips and tricks. I have another video on how to use embossing folders with different techniques, so you can want to check that out. I'm going to leave that linked in the description below. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.